Orchestra de memoir plot with fresh names, avoiding ban list entirely. Orchestra de memoir plot with fresh names, avoiding ban list entirely. The morning my son-in-law decided I had lost my mind, I was sitting at my own kitchen table, reading a financial statement that was lying to me. It was a Sterling Ridge Wealth Management quarterly report, the kind with the embossed gold logo and the little pie charts that look like reassurance. It belonged to my neighbor down the gravel road, a widow. I'll call my old friend, Mrs. Holloway, 81 years old, who had brought it over the day before because she wanted me to tell her how well she was doing. I had been a fraud examiner for 31 years. I told her I'd take a look. I had a cup of black coffee going cold at my elbow, and a yellow legal pad next to her statement, and I was three numbers in when I knew something was wrong with it. Her account showed a 9 and 1.1% annualized return every quarter, in a flat market, in a bad market, in a good one. 9.1, like a heartbeat. Nothing real on this earth pays you the exact same number while the whole world goes up and down around it. Nothing except a lie that hasn't been caught yet. That's when the side door opened, and my daughter came in with my son-in-law behind her. And he was holding a glossy brochure for a place called Maple Court Senior Living, and my daughter wouldn't look me in the eye. Dad, she said, we need to talk about some things, while you're still in a good place to make decisions. I closed the legal pad over Mrs. Holloway's statement. I said, all right. My son-in-law set the brochure down on the table like he was laying down a winning hand. He had a way of doing that, of putting an object in front of you and letting it do the talking, so that if you objected, you weren't objecting to him. You were objecting to a brochure, to a piece of paper, to reason itself. He smiled at me the way you smile at a dog that's getting old. He said, we just want what's best for you, Roland. You know that. I said I did. I said it twice, the way they wanted to hear it, soft and a little confused. And then I picked up my coffee, and I drank it cold, and I let them believe they had walked into my kitchen and found a tired old man who was finally ready to be handled. They did not know what I had spent my career doing. They thought they did. They thought I was a retired accountant who used to check people's taxes, which is what my son-in-law told people at parties, with a little laugh, because it made me sound small. What I actually did for 31 years was work for the State Securities Division, examining investment advisors, the men who hold other people's money and promise to grow it. My job was to walk into their offices with a calculator and a subpoena and find the place where the story they told the world stopped matching the money that actually moved. I found Ponzi schemes the way some men find arrowheads in a creek bed. I knew the shape of one in the dark. My wife used to say I noticed things other people walked right past. She'd been gone 2 years by then. Pancreatic. 11 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral, and in the last good week she held my hand in the bed we'd shared for 41 years and said, you always see it, Roland. You just never say anything until you're sure. I've thought about that sentence more times than I can count. She knew me better than anyone ever has or will. She knew that quiet in me is not the same as empty. So let me tell you how I'm sure. I raised one daughter. Her mother and I gave her everything we had and most of what we didn't. She married a charming man. I'll be honest with you the way I couldn't be honest with myself for a long time. I never liked him, and I told myself that was just a father being a father. He was good looking and quick, and he remembered the name of your dog and the score of last week's Tennessee game. And he ran his own little wealth management shop out by the lake with his name on the door and a flag out front. And within a few years, he had half the retirees in our county handing him their life savings. People at our church loved him. He sponsored the youth baseball team. He bought a pontoon boat and named it after my daughter. He drove a German car that cost more than the house I raised her in. For a long time, I thought I just resented how easy everything came to him. I'm a man who counted every dollar twice. He spent like the spigot would never run dry. The first thing that snagged, really snagged, was Mrs. Holloway's statement that morning. But once one thread pulls, you start to see the whole sweater. I went out to my truck and drove into town, sat at the public library, and did the kind of work I used to get paid for. Sterling Ridge was registered as an investment advisor, but his filings hadn't been updated in 3 years. The fund he kept steering folks into, the one paying that beautiful flat 9%, wasn't registered as a security at all. He called it the Sterling Ridge Income Partners, and he sold it church pew to church pew, kitchen table to kitchen table, to people exactly like my old neighbor, people who trusted a smile, people who'd never call the SEC because they wouldn't know it had a phone number. I spent 6 weeks at that library and at my own kitchen table after the family went home, building it out the way I'd build a case file. I got 3 more of his statements quietly by asking a few old friends from the Ruatan Club if I could take a peek, professional curiosity. Every one of them showed the same impossible flat return. And when I lined up the timing of the deposits and withdrawals, I saw it plain as a county road. The money coming in from new investors in March was the money going out to old investors in April. It wasn't growing anybody's savings. There was no fund. There was a checking account with a fancy name, and he was robbing tomorrow to pay yesterday, skimming the difference into that boat and that car and that lake house, and the whole thing only stayed standing as long as new money kept walking in the door faster than old money tried to walk out. I knew exactly how that story ends. I'd written the ending 40 times in my career. The music stops, the new money slows down, and the last people in line, the 81-year-old widows who put in everything, lose everything. And then I understood the brochure. Because here is the part that took me longer to see than it should have. And I'm ashamed of that, because it was about my own family and I didn't want to look at it straight. My son in law's machine was starting to run short. I could see it in the withdrawal patterns, in the way redemptions were taking longer to clear, in the little notes folks like Mrs. Holloway mentioned about processing delays. He needed cash, real cash, and he needed it fast. And his father-in-law happened to own a paid-off lake house on Norris Lake worth $400,000, plus a stack of certificates of deposit my wife and I had built up over 40 years of doing without. He needed my money, and he needed me quiet. And the cleanest way to get both, the way a smart man would do it, was to convince his wife and a judge that her father couldn't be trusted with his own affairs anymore. That's what the brochure was. That's what the careful little comments at dinner were, the ones I've been brushing off for months. Dad, did you forget we talked about that? Dad, you told me that same story Tuesday. He left the stove on again, I'm worried. I had not left the stove on again, I'm worried. I had not left the stove on. I have never in my life left a stove on. But my daughter heard it 3 times from a man she loved and trusted, and the third time she started to believe it because that's how it works. That's how every good lie works. It doesn't ask you to swallow it whole. It just feeds you a little doubt at a time. Until one morning, the doubt is the floor you're standing on. They were going to have me declared incompetent. They were going to take power of attorney, sell the lake house, cash the CDs, and feed every dollar of it into a sinking Ponzi scheme to buy themselves a few more months. And the one man on God's green earth who could read his books and prove what he was, they were going to lock behind a diagnosis where nobody would ever believe a word I said. I sat with that for a long time. I sat with it out on my dock with a glass of sweet tea while the sun went down over the water my wife and I had bought that view of in 1986. I'll tell you what I felt, and it wasn't rage, though I expected rage. What I felt was cold and clear, like the first morning of deer season. My daughter was being used. My granddaughter was being raised by a thief, and a room full of decent people who'd shaken his hand at church were going to lose everything they had. The easy thing, the thing every fiber of me wanted to do, was to drive over there that night and put his own statements on his kitchen table and watch his face, confront him, tell my daughter, make the scene. I let myself imagine it for about a minute and a half. And then the professional in me, the man who'd watched 100 fraud cases live or die on whether the target got tipped off too early, sat that hothead down and asked him one question: what does that get you? It gets him warned. It gets the document shredded, the account drained overnight to some place I'd never trace, the boat sold, the story rewritten, so I'm the bitter, confused old man who attacked his daughter's husband. It gets Mrs. Holloway nothing back. It gets him a head start. No. If you spent your life watching liars, you learn the most powerful thing you own is the moment before they know you see them. I'd already lost it once almost by being too slow. I wasn't going to lose it by being too fast. So I made one phone call. There was a man I'd worked across the table from for years, back when I was at the State Division. He'd been a lawyer for the other side once, and we'd nearly killed each other in a deposition, and then we'd ended up respecting each other, the way two stubborn men sometimes do. He'd gone on to the U.S. Attorney's office. By the time I called him, he was a senior man in the white-collar unit, the kind of prosecutor other lawyers lose sleep over. I'll call him my old friend, the prosecutor. He answered on the third ring, and when I told him who it was, he laughed and said he figured I was finally calling to take him fishing. I said, I've got some better than fish. I drove down to meet him 2 days later with a banker's box. 31 years of habit doesn't leave you. I had it organized the way I used to organize a referral to the feds. The statements, the timeline, the redemption patterns, the registration filings that didn't exist, a spreadsheet that walked the cash in a circle and showed it eating its own tail. He went through it slow, not saying anything, the way a real one does. And when he got to the page where I'd matched the March deposits to the April payouts, he stopped and tapped it twice with one finger and looked at me over his reading glasses. Roland, he said, how long have you been retired? Long enough to be bored, I said. He didn't smile. He said, this is a clean case. This is the cleanest referral I've seen come through a door in 5 years. Then he set it down and folded his hands and told me the truth, which is why I trusted him. He said it would take time. He said the Bureau would need to do its own work. Parallel, quiet, subpoena the bank, turn a witness or two, because a case like this lives or dies on whether you can prove the man knew. He said if we moved too fast and my son-in-law caught wind, he'd run the account dry and lawyer up and we'd be chasing him for years. He said the strongest thing you can do is nothing. Go home and be exactly what he thinks you are. I asked him what the odds were. I'm an actuary at heart. I wanted a number. He thought about it honestly. He said, with what you've handed me, if you can stay quiet and let us build it, I'd put it north of 80%. He's in a federal courtroom inside a year and a half. And then he told me what the 80% would cost me because he was decent enough not to let me walk into it blind. He said, here's the part nobody warns you about. To keep him calm, you have to let him win. You're going to sign that power of attorney. You're going to tour that nursing home and act grateful. You're going to let your daughter believe her father is slipping. Your granddaughter is going to watch you become a feeble old man, and she's going to pull away from you because that's what kids do. They can't bear it. People at your church are going to lower their voices when you walk up, and you can't say a word to anybody, not your closest friend, not your own child, because all it takes is one person who loves you trying to protect you, and the whole thing comes apart. You'll be alone inside it. For a year, maybe more, and if it falls through, you'll have signed away your house for nothing. I sat there in his office and I thought about my wife's hand in mine, and that sentence, you just never say anything until you're sure. I said, I'm sure. He nodded. He said, then we begin. I went home and I became the man they needed me to be. I signed the power of attorney on a Thursday afternoon at my daughter's kitchen table with my son-in-law's lawyer there and a notary they brought. My daughter held my hand while I signed it, and she said, this is just so we can help you, Daddy. And her eyes were wet. And I want you to understand something. She meant it. She was not in on it. She was a good woman being walked off a cliff by a man she loved, one careful step at a time. And the cruelest thing he did in the whole business wasn't to me. It was to her. He made her the instrument of her own father's ruin and let her think she was being kind. I signed my name with a steady hand, and I let it shake a little at the end, because a shaking hand is what they were looking for, and a man who knows how to look at things knows how to be looked at too. I told Maple Court Senior Living. I told the nice young activities director that I like bingo, which is a lie I'll answer for some day. I let my son-in-law list the lake house with a realtor, and I stood on my own dock while a woman in a blazer photographed the view my wife loved, and I said the words, I just want what's easiest for everybody, and I watched his face soften with something I finally recognized for what it was, not affection, relief. The relief of a man who thinks the last danger in his world has just agreed to put itself in a home. I kept a notebook, old habit, a cheap spiral one from the dollar store, in the bottom drawer of my desk under the warranty papers for a furnace I replaced in 2009. I wrote down dates. The day the realtor came, the day my daughter mentioned lightly that my son-in-law had found a great place for your CDs to do more good. The day Mrs. Holloway came up my road again, this time crying a little, because she tried to take $10,000 out for a new roof and been told there was a redemption queue and it would be a few more weeks. I sat her down on my kitchen table and gave her sweet tea, and I could not tell her the truth. The truth was the most precious thing I owned, and I had to spend it all in one place. But I could do one thing. I told her, friend to friend, that an old fraud man's gut said she ought not put another dime in, and she ought to quietly call the state securities division and ask them to look at her account. I gave her the number on a slip of paper. I told her not to mention my name. She thought I was a sweet, addled old man being protected, and she patted my hand, and I don't know to this day whether she called. But I had to do something, and that was the most I could do without lighting the whole field on fire. The hardest part was my granddaughter. She was 15. She and I had built a whole world together when she was small. I taught her to bait a hook and to read a topographic map and to count cards. Just enough to get thrown out of a casino. Never enough to get caught. That winter, she stopped texting me back. She'd come to Sunday dinner and look at her phone and answer me in one word. And once I heard her tell her mother in the kitchen, not quietly enough, "It's just hard to see Grandpa like this." Like this, 15 years old and already learning to grieve a man who was sitting right there, sharper than he'd ever been, choosing to let her think he was disappearing. I cannot tell you what that cost me. There is no number for it. I went home those nights, and I sat in the dark, and I held my wife's reading glasses, which I'd never been able to throw away, and I said out loud to an empty house, "A little longer, just a little longer." It took 14 months. My old friend, the prosecutor, called me maybe 6 times in that whole stretch, always from a number I didn't know, always short. The bureau had the bank records. They'd flipped his office manager, a young woman who'd figured out what was going on and wanted no part of going down for it. They had a wire on a meeting where he told a new investor, a retired school teacher, that the fund was fully liquid, you can get out any time, which was the lie that turned it from bad investing into a federal crime. Each call he'd say a little more, and each time he'd end the same way. "Stay where you are, Roland. Don't change a thing." The thing that finally set the date was the gala. My son-in-law, you have to understand, was a man who believed in himself the way a flood believes in itself. The walls were closing in. The redemption queue was getting longer. The complaints were starting. A couple of clients were getting nervous, and his answer was not to run. It was to throw a party. A big one. A client appreciation evening at the nicest event hall in 3 counties, 200 people, an open bar, a slideshow of beaming retirees on beaches, all of it designed to do the one thing a posse must always do to survive: bring in fresh money. He'd invited every retiree in the church directory. He'd invited my granddaughter's whole travel softball team's parents. He was going to stand up at a podium under a banner with his own name on it and tell 200 trusting people to hand him their savings, and my daughter was going to stand beside him in a new dress and beam. My old friend, the prosecutor, called me on a Tuesday. He said, "That party of his, we're going to come say hello." I asked if I should stay home. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "Roland, you earned the front row. Be there. Bring your daughter. You'll want her with you for the part that comes after." The night of the gala, I put on the gray suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral, because it was the only good one I had left, and because I wanted her with me. My daughter picked me up. In the car, she fussed over my collar and told me I looked handsome, and told me, gently, that we'd talk soon about getting you all settled at Maple Court, that the house had an offer, that everything was coming together. I told her she looked beautiful. I told her her mother would have been proud of the woman she'd become. I meant every word of it, and it nearly broke me to say it, knowing what was 40 minutes away. The hall was lit up like a wedding. There was a string trio and a chocolate fountain and a giant pull-up banner with his grinning face on it next to the words, "S. Sewering Your Tomro." My son-in-law worked that room like a man born to it, a hand on every shoulder, a joke for every husband, a compliment for every wife. He saw me come in on my daughter's arm, and he came straight over all warmth, and he leaned down close to my ear the way you do with the elderly, and he said, Glad you could make it out, Roland. Big night, best night of my life, honestly." He squeezed my shoulder. "We're really going to take care of you now." I looked up at him. I let him see exactly what he wanted to see, one last time. I said, "I know you will, son." He clapped me on the back and walked up to the podium, and the trio went quiet, and 200 people turned their happy faces toward him, and that is the moment the doors at the back of the hall opened. They came in without drama, which is somehow worse than drama. 4 of them, plus my old friend the prosecutor in a suit, and a woman with a badge on a lanyard and a folder in her hand. The room didn't understand at first. My son-in-law had his mouth open to start his speech, and he stopped, and you could watch the calculation run across his face, the way I'd watched it run across so many faces over so many years. The little flicker where a man who's been getting away with it his whole life realizes, in real time, that the getting away with it has ended. The woman with the badge walked up to the podium in front of all of them and said his name and the words, "You're under arrest." As she read the counts, securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and the numbers, dozens of them, and a courtroom's worth of people who'd come to give him their money stood frozen with champagne in their hands. My granddaughter was near the front with her friends. I saw her face. "I will carry that too." My daughter grabbed my arm. She said, Dad, what is happening?" She said it the way she used to say it as a little girl waking from a nightmare, and I put my hand over hers, the same hand that had held mine when I signed those papers, and I did the thing I've been waiting 14 months to be allowed to do. I told her the truth. I said, "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to trust that everything I'm about to tell you, I did for you and those kids. He's been stealing from the people in this room for years. I found it before any of this started. The home, the papers you had me sign, selling the house, that was him trying to use my money to cover it and trying to make sure nobody would ever believe me if I told. I let him think he'd won so these men could do their jobs. I'm not slipping, baby. I never was. I'm sorry I had to let you believe it. It was the only way to keep you out of it." She looked at me for a long, long time in the middle of that ruined party with her husband being walked toward the door in handcuffs. And I watched 14 months of careful little lies fall away from her all at once. And underneath them, I watched her find her father again, the one who taught her to swim and check her own oil and never trust a deal too good to be true. She put her face against my shoulder in the gray suit I'd buried her mother in, and she cried like the bottom of the world had dropped out. And I held my daughter up the way I had been waiting all that time to be allowed to hold her. It came apart for him the way those things do, slow and total. He fought it for a year and a half with lawyers I'm told he could no longer really afford. The evidence was a wall. His office manager testified. So did I. They put me on the stand for the better part of a day, the incompetent old man, walking a federal jury line by line through the circle. His money ran in, and I have never in my life felt so completely myself as I did in that chair. He took a plea in the end. The judge gave him 11 years and ordered restitution he will never be able to pay. Sterling Ridge Wealth Management was dissolved by court order. The pontoon boat with my daughter's name on it was seized and sold on a government auction website to a man in Kentucky. My daughter was never charged. The U.S. Attorney's Office made the determination that she'd been a tool, not a partner, that she'd signed where she was told to sign and never knew what she was signing, and that determination is the reason she's free today. It did not spare her everything. The house they lived in had been bought with stolen money, and she lost it. She lost most of what she thought was hers. She moved into a small apartment across town and took a job doing the books for a veterinary clinic, which is honest work and which she's good at, because whatever else is true, she is my daughter, and she can count. The lake house never sold. I took it off the market the week after the arrest, and I'm sitting on the dock of it as I tell you this. My CDs are right where my wife and I left them. The guardianship petition my son-in-law had filed quietly through his lawyer was withdrawn so fast it left scorch marks. The State Securities Division asked me to consult on training their new examiners, and I said yes. And I drove down once a month for a year and taught young people half my age how to see the thing in the dark. Mrs. Holloway got some of her money back. Not all of it. There's never all of it. That's the cruelty of these schemes. The money is gone. It was always gone. But the receiver clawed back enough that she got her new roof. And she brings me a pecan pie every November. And she still doesn't know I'm the reason. I'd just as soon she never did. My granddaughter came back to me slow, the way the dogwoods come back, a little at a time and then all at once. She's 17 now. One evening last spring, she sat down next to me on this dock and was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Grandpa, you let everybody think you were losing it on purpose for over a year." I told her I did. She thought about that, the way she thinks about everything, hard, turning it over. And then she said, "That's the smartest, saddest thing I ever heard." Then she leaned her head on my shoulder, 15 years old again for just a second, and we watched the sun go down over the water her grandmother loved. And neither one of us said another word, because we didn't need to. She learned the lesson without my having to teach it. Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is to be underestimated and wait. I think about that morning in my kitchen more than I should. The gold logo on the widow's lying statement. My daughter not able to look at me. My son-in-law setting a brochure on my table like he was laying down a winning hand, telling me he just wanted what was best for me, certain to the marrow of his bones that the quiet old accountant across the table was the easiest problem he had. He never once considered that the man he'd decided was too far gone to manage his own checkbook had spent 31 years taking apart men exactly like him and was, at that very moment, 3 numbers into doing it again. So let me ask you something, since you've come this far with me. If you found out that the person your own family loved and trusted was robbing the people around you blind, and you were the only soul alive who could prove it, would you stand up that day and make the scene and risk losing it all to one warning shot too soon? Or could you do the harder thing, the lonelier thing, and let them believe they'd already won and wait? If you've ever been written off by the very people who should have known you best, if anybody ever looked at you and saw less than you are, do me a favor. Leave one word down below. Just one. Tell me what they thought you were. I read every single one of them. And if any part of this story found you tonight, give it a thumbs up so it finds the next person who needs it. And subscribe so you don't miss where I take you next. I'll see you down the road. People ask me how a man sits across from someone robbing his neighbors and quietly steering his own daughter off a cliff and says nothing for 14 months. The honest answer is that the silence was the hardest work I ever did, harder than any case I built in 31 years of doing it for a paycheck. Every part of me wanted to stand up in that kitchen, put my son-in-law's own lying statements on the table, and watch his face. But I spent a career learning a simple, brutal truth about cause and effect. Warn a thief 1 hour too soon and you don't stop him. You only teach him how to run. So I let him believe the quiet old man was the easiest problem he had, because being underestimated was the only weapon nobody could take from me. I want to be careful about what I think actually saved us, because it wasn't luck and it wasn't cleverness alone. It started with refusing to do the thing that would have felt good. Driving over there to make a scene would have protected my pride and cost Mrs. Pecht Holloway her roof and a room full of decent people their savings. Choosing their good over my own comfort again and again on mornings when nobody was watching and nobody would ever know, that was the foundation everything else stood on. Without it, the smartest plan in the world would have just been revenge. The second thing was learning to actually see. Anybody could have looked at Mrs. Holloway's statement and felt reassured by that pretty 9%. It took 31 years of training my eyes to feel the cold little wrongness of a number that never moves. Seeing clearly is a thing you build, slow, by counting twice your whole life and trusting what the numbers tell you over what a charming man tells you. My son-in-law had a gift for the smile. I had a gift for the ledger. In the end, the ledger won, the way it always does, because the ledger has nothing to protect. But seeing it and surviving it are two different things. The part I'm proudest of isn't the case. It's the 14 months. It's letting my granddaughter watch me become a feeble old fool when one sentence would have set her straight. It's holding that secret alone in the dark house with my wife's reading glasses in my hand, telling myself, just a little longer. That kind of waiting doesn't come from being smart. It comes from deciding you can endure one more day, and then doing it again. I sit on my dock now where they tried to sell the view my wife loved, and my granddaughter sits beside me. And I think the same thing every evening. The people who write you off hand you something precious if you're willing to be patient enough to use it. They show you exactly how little they're watching.